Countess Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the 2nd edition of AD&D. Well, we've been talking about hirelings as of last episode. Today, let's finish talking about the Sage, and then talk about soldiers. So the Sage. We talked a little bit about the Sage, but the fact is there could be restrictions or limitations to what a Sage knows. This is usually going to be dependent on this field of study. That list of fields of study that was in the book that talks about the various things a Sage could know also lists possible limitations. Now, some of these limitations make a lot of sense. If a Sage studies a specific race, they're going to be limited to a specific race. If they study a region, it will be a specific region, and the size of said region is going to be, of course, dependent on your game. If it's a certain plane, then yes, they're going to be studying that plane. These are limiting factors of these sages. Beyond these, there usually isn't a limitation listed, but you still might have a limitation added in. The fact is, every sage is going to be limited on their knowledge based on the knowledge that would exist in their field of study for your campaign world. So if you're in a world where a certain field of study is less developed than another field of study would be in the standard fantasy world that Dungeons & Dragons establishes, then yes, the Sage will know less. So the Sage only knows as much as exists within the world you're building as the Dungeon Master. Now, when it comes to Sages, there are two ways you can handle them giving out their answers. The first off is the very simple method. This method is particularly useful because it's quick and efficient, but the fact is that also you do not know the natural effects of answering a question upon the game world, not always. So here's where it comes in. The Sage knows the answer. That's it. The Sage knows the answer. The Sage answers your players correctly. The thing is here, this can be limited by, of course, how this information will affect your gaming world. So that's the question you're going to have to ask yourself. If you don't know the answer, well, it's up to you how you want to handle it. But if you know this will have no effect overall on the gaming world or will push your characters in a proper direction, go ahead and answer them. If you know it will disrupt things, the Sage doesn't know the answer. So you can see this first way of looking at it is very simple, but the fact is it's very cut and dry. There is no real in-between, and it does feel a little less natural in a way. This is more or less just you rewarding your players in a certain way for knowing when to ask the right answer, the right question to the right person. The fact is, you could also limit it in a way, too, that you could have your Sage know all of the answer or only a little bit of the answer. So you can very easily customize it just this way. But this involves purely you choosing things. If you want to add, the other way you could do this is you could go to the dice roll, which the fact is each Sage will have their own proficiency at the knowledge they're at. It'll be equal to 14 plus 1d6 depending on their overall training, skill, level, ability scores. There will be a DC based upon the difficulty of the knowledge that they will have to roll against. In this case, though, they will have an answer for your players regardless. The fact is, if they make the number that they're trying to get or lower, they're successfully getting the proper information. They're giving it to your players. They know what's up. If they fail, they will still answer your players, but they will answer something incorrectly. They will basically give you false information. It should fit still within the purview of the setting that's going on, that's being established. But they don't know the right thing. Ooh. So that's why this is much more of a dangerous thing in a way for your players too. And it does separate itself out from you just choosing. Because in this one, failure just means they know incorrect information. Now, a question could be very complex. Similar to as we were talking about a Sage having part of the answer, there could be more than one component to the question itself that a Sage will have to know. In this case, they'll have to make this check for each of these, this proficiency check. Any that they fail might have wrong information to it, but they will know part of the answer in this way. Again, should still reflect the knowledge that the players already have, the expression of it. It should be an extension of that knowledge that they already have built up. So an answer from a sage, regardless of the method you have, comes in 3 categories: a general, a specific, and an exact answer. These affect the difficulty that it is, and basically how hard it is and how much of a sage may actually know. So these are modifications to difficulty of that proficiency, that's for sure. There can be such questions that are so exact that your sage, it might be even more difficult than it possibly could reach. Or so exact that the sage, again, only knows little bits of it, parts of it, depending on their check too. The more exact they have, similar to having to break up the question there, the more you have to break up the question anyway. It's more detail-based, and that's where we're breaking it down even more. Now, sages fairly consistently require a library to do their work. Basically, it's a reference material of everything they've studied. This could be a personal library or one connected to an institution. Personal ones are usually very expensive. They have to pay for a lot of materials in order to create it. A institution-based one, usually they have to give some kind of stipend in order to continue using it. Regardless, you could go to a sage without a library. It just increases the difficulty of them actually knowing the information by a great degree. They require this basically to help them remember stuff. Now, the other fact is, sages require time in order to basically figure out this information. They're not remembering everything off the top of their heads usually. It will require them to do some kind of research with their library to discover what the truth is. The more you rush them, the less accurate the answer will be, because they're rushing their purpose along. They're making it that they could make mistakes and look up the wrong thing. They can't cross-reference. They can't do all the things that would make it that they would give you the correct answer, or it makes it less likely, I should really say. So last group of hirelings is, of course, the soldiers. These are people trained in the art of warfare. Many of them are willing to give up their lives for the tasks at hand. They're ready to risk their lives for the job they've been hired on for, to fight, possibly to the death. They have their own special requirements and costs, and there is a table that lists a suggested list of basic soldier groups. Now, the fact is, each of these soldier groups has their own historical basis in soldiers that have existed over time. And you can take a look at them for any basic description of what this role is in the book. These aren't the only soldier groups that could exist, because you are in a fantasy setting. You could meet a fantasy-based soldier, something that's extraordinary, different than normal. The fact is, most of the time, this is going to be more campaign-based, and it's really campaign-based whether you could hire them on or not. More than likely, you're going to encounter these as NPCs. Just the same with as the majority of these soldiers, you're going to encounter them possibly as an antagonist to you, or at very least as an NPC that you might have to deal with in a degree. These fantasy-based ones do exist, though, and you should make sure to have them be shown in your campaign. Most commanders are usually going to have 1 or 2 specific, units or individuals of this, so it might be a couple of elven archers that work for them, or a small group of elven archers they've hired on because they're expert archers. So you can see that's a very fantasy-based thing. Your players more than likely won't hire them on unless they're in a campaign where it's got a very heavy elven influence. But that's it for today. We talked about sages the rest of the way, and using sages, and the importance of knowing when to answer the question and when not to. But the fact is, you could also rely on proficiency of the person they actually found to see what kind of answer they have. There are levels of this entire thing of when it's right to answer and when it's right to give false information and when it's right to not answer, that you have to determine to a degree yourself. Period. You just have to determine it by yourself. Regardless, when you have that sage, they will more than likely require you to spend some money on them, because they usually have some kind of stipend. If it's their own personal library or one that they're using as part of an institution, they usually have to pay some money somewhere to be able to use it in the first place. So they might ask you for that money. Then I moved on and talked about the soldier. The person who's made to go to war. There are a lot of different types of soldiers, and I didn't dive into the various types of soldiers. That's up to you to look at what's appropriate for your campaign world. But this goes beyond this list into fantasy ones, because guess what? We're in a fantasy game, so a couple fantasy units of soldiers do exist. In the next episode, I'm going to dive into of employing a hireling, what it means to employ a hireling, what it means to pay for one, all those details related to hirelings. A little bit more. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It's just for the channel, the empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon. Link description below. There's some great rewards there. It helps to grow and improve the channel. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.